so we can actually enjoy ourselves. That's a little snarky commentary in the back. That's nice. It's nice to have a break. Okay, where we left off last time was me berating you guys and practically on hands and knees begging you to watch A Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès, because of how significant it is in the history of media and the history of film. And again, even though, by today's standards, it's kind of corny effects, it's, I get it, we're all jaded, we've all seen Avatar, but the premise of it and how it set the stage for everything that was to come. Well, the next major event that we still feel the ripples of today, but in a very different way, was in 1915, when a man named D.W. Griffith releases his film, Birth of a Nation. How many of you guys have heard of Birth of a Nation? It's one of the most well-known old-timey films out there. What do you know about Birth of a Nation?
It was the one that portrayed the Klan in a positive light. Yeah.
It was a love letter to the KKK. And here's the thing, as a film person, as a media professor, and if you continue your studies in media as you move on from here, you're going to face the same problem. Birth of a Nation is a real icky point for film history, because on the one hand, D.W. Griffith absolutely revolutionized filmmaking, right? He absolutely revolutionized cinematography, framing, shot composition. He revolutionized, the mise en scène, how you frame that scene within the lens. He revolutionized directing, right? Really just, from a technical perspective, Birth of a Nation is so critical and pivotal to how films were made from that point forward. It just completely changed the approach to filmmaking. It was wildly successful. It was a massively successful film. But content-wise, it was a love letter to the KKK. It was about how the KKK rose out of the ashes of the Confederacy to protect white women from the scourge of the rapey black man. And it's disturbing. Not just by 2020 standards. Even in 1915, you watch this and go, holy shit, right? But it's very telling about the society. The fact that it was successful says a lot about the society. And that's something that, again, I've mentioned, and we're going to talk about a lot in this class later on. Media is a representation of the society that produces it. It says something, like, you go to a humanities class, right? Or you go to a Western Civ class. Almost everything we know about ancient Greece, we know because of their art. We know because of their poetry. We know because of their pottery. We are able to learn because of the artwork that they produced. That didn't stop. Right? That concept doesn't stop because we're still here. You learn a lot about any society from any period of time by the art they produce. And it says a lot that in the United States in 1915, a film about the scourge of the black man was wildly successful. So successful that the President of the United States had a private screening at the White House. The President of the United States was like, we should show that at the White House. And they fucking did. They did. Birth of a Nation is another one you can watch on YouTube. Right? You can go on YouTube and watch it, and it's, holy shit. It's really, really alarming. I think it's a great example, it's a great encapsulation of so many of the concepts about media and why they're important. Number one, yes, it was brilliantly technologically advanced, moved forward the art form in so many ways, but at the same time, it's a great little time capsule, right, of what American mentality was. A lot of people actually credit Birth of a Nation with the restoration and the kind of reinforcement of the power of the KKK. The KKK formed right after the Civil War, and it had lost a lot of influence by the time that D.W. Griffith made the film. But after the film and national distribution, the KKK really kind of resurfaced and gained a lot of power throughout the country again. It became a recruiting tool. The movie became a recruiting tool for the KKK. So on the one hand, Again, brilliant technical direction. On the other hand, holy shit. One of the most popular movies in the country was about how awesome the KKK is. Right? Says a lot. In 1927, the Jazz Singer is released. This is another one that people have probably heard of, right? You're likely to have heard of the Jazz Singer. You guys ever heard of the Jazz Singer?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was special about the Jazz Singer?
It was the first movie that had sound.
It was the first talkie, except it wasn't. And that's not your fault. That's what we teach everybody, right? It's like saying Edison invented the light bulb. No, he fucking didn't. Right? Columbus discovered America. No, he fucking didn't. Right? Well, Jazz Singer wasn't the first talkie. It was the first commercially successful talkie. It was the first talkie that made a fuck ton of money. Right? And again, from a technical perspective, this is huge. Because for the first time, film companies see that if you attach sound to the picture, it can make money. It's worth the investment. Because make no mistake, it's an investment to add sound. You need to now worry about your sound quality. You need to retrofit theaters to have the speaker system. Prior to talkies, the sound you heard in the theater was by a live organist in the theater, sometimes even a whole live orchestra. And they would play the music in time with the movie every single time it played. After talkies, okay, well now we have to have speakers. Now we have to have a sound system. Now I have to record differently. The cameras that they were using prior to the talkies, the explosion of talkies, cameras were incredibly loud. They used lights that were incredibly loud. It's like, how can lights be loud? They're called phosphorus lights. They give off a shit ton of light. They're super bright. But you can hear the electricity going through the light bulb. They had to retrofit everything about making a movie. And that's expensive. So once the Jazz Singer makes money, that's when film studios go, oh, okay, maybe it's worth it. The other thing that's significant about the Jazz Singer is, again, how super fucking racist it was. Frighteningly racist. Yes, it was the first commercially successful talkie, but what was the movie about?
This guy was in blackface.
Yes! It was about a guy, Al Jolson, a Jewish man, wanting to be a jazz singer, but not able to make it, so he paints his face black, paints his lips to be extra large, wears gloves, and does this song and dance, minstrel show. Blackface is a term that you hear used, but what it really means is, let me play on every negative stereotype there is about black people. Because it'd be one thing if Al Jolson just painted his face black and walked around and was Al Jolson. But no, he over-accentuated every stereotype there was about black men. The big lips, the big eyes, all the time, the fuck? Not only was the Jazz Singer a technological advancement, but again, like Birth of a Nation, tells you a lot about the society that glorifies that looks at that and goes, oh, that was great, I like that, that's fantastic. God! Still, and again, you can go on YouTube and you can see clips of the Jazz Singer. In particular, watch the clip of him singing Mammy at the end of the film. And holy fuck! I mean, holy shit, is it terrifying to think that people not only thought this was a good idea, but went through all of the work to do it and distribute it and were applauded for it. They were applauded for it. In 1930, the MPPDA adopts a production code. There we go. The production code was known as the Hays Code, H-A-Y-S, the Hays Code. Named after the Postmaster General of the United States, whose name was Hayes, and who was tasked with developing this production code. MPPDA, by the way, if you're interested, stands for Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, in case you're curious. It was basically like the collection of film studios at the time. So the MPPDA adopts the Hays Code, which is a code that proactively says what is and is not allowed to be shown or said in a film. This is a set of rules that says if your film shows this body part, we will not allow it to be distributed. If your film uses this kind of action, we're not going to allow it to be distributed. It's the first form of internal self-censorship in the industry. It's the industry's first attempt to say, all right, let's regulate ourselves so that nobody else has to do it for us. One of the biggest problems with the production code was just how insane some of the requirements were, some of the restrictions were. The production code, as with a lot of things, you learn a lot about the authors, not necessarily by what they put in, but by what they've done. The production code included very strict regulations on sex, sexuality, nudity, right? It was very sexually repressive. But it had limits on murder, right, and blood. Didn't have limits on abuse. You could beat the shit out of a woman on camera and it would be fine. You could depict rape, but you couldn't show cleavage. You couldn't show a woman's leg, right? It's telling, and you can look this up, right? Again, this is not lost to history. You can Google a production code, and I actually used to use that in class. I would go through it just to highlight some, but it just ended up becoming a whole other thing. You can look up some of these standards and say, can't you think of better standards? Anybody who looks at the Hays Code can immediately go, okay, but what about this? Why isn't this mentioned in there? And then you'll see some of the things that are and think, well, why? Why do you care that much, right? The positive thing about the production code is that everybody knew it up front. There was no guessing. You knew what was and wasn't allowed, right? That's the reason why in a classroom we give you guys the rubric for stuff ahead of time, right? We tell you this is what we're grading you by, so that you know how to tailor your work to fit what I'm looking for. Same with the production code. If I let you know ahead of time, this is acceptable or this is unacceptable, it's a lot easier to put your work, to produce your work in a way that you know is going to pay off. You know it's actually going to get out to see the world. In 1939, television debuts. Yay, we're finally to television.
You skipped over King Kong, though.
Goddamn right, we skipped over King
Oh,
Kong.
that's my favorite movie of all time.
Well, I mean, it's schlocky, but you do you.
But it's the first everybody pioneered so many special effects. It was the first movie, the full orchestrated soundtrack written for it.
It didn't pioneer those effects.
Well, I mean, they already existed, but like actually animatronics and rear projection techniques and stuff like that all came from King Kong. Huh?
Yeah. Well, it was popularized.
They developed a lot of new technology.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
I mean, The Lost World had already done some of that. You obviously have the existing work of Willis O'Brien already, but that was like the...
Yeah, that's where it all really paid off, yeah. But fun, while we're on King Kong. What studio produced King Kong?
RKO.
RKO. Yeah, RKO. What was RKO's most famous movie?
No, still another one, huh?
Don't know?
I would have assumed it was King Kong.
No? Citizen Kane.
Oh, really?
RKO produced Citizen Kane. RKO was also the only one of the big five that didn't survive. All the other big five movie studios got assimilated into another. RKO was converted to a radio company and then dissolved. Anyway, life's about the hard choices, man. I gotta cut some shit. In 1939, television debuts at the World's Fair in New York. In 1939, at the World's Fair, which I wish was a thing still. Every time you hear about the World's Fair, it was so fucking cool. You know, like I wish there was still the World's Fair. There might be, we just don't talk about that. But in 1939, television debuts in the World's Fair in New York City. And in that World's Fair, the way that they debuted television is they had an address from the President of the United States broadcast to the television. Does anyone know who the President of the United States was in 1939? You don't need to know. I'm a nerd, so.
Is it Roosevelt yet, or is it?
Yep.
Okay.
Which one?
FDR.
Yes, crippled. It was the crippled Roosevelt. Yes, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, if you're ever on Jeopardy and they ask you who was the first president on television, the answer is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, in 1939 at the World's Fair, they say, hey, look at this amazing new technology we have. It was an incredibly small picture. It was really shitty quality, but it was proof of concept, right? It was a look out world, this is this amazing thing coming your way. This is the next big thing. We can now distribute signals, video signals, through the air. Just like radio, we can now send video through the air. In 1947, HUAC calls the Hollywood 10 to testify before Congress. Oh. Does anybody know what HUAC was? HUAC stands for the House Un-American Affairs Committee.
They're looking for communists?
Yep. HUAC was an offshoot of McCarthyism, the Red Scare. Just McCarthy, who McCarthyism was named after, was a senator. Anybody know where he was from?
Wisconsin.
From Wisconsin! Yeah, fuck Wisconsin. Joe McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin who started the national craze about we have to hunt down the commies at all levels of American government and American life. Excuse me. McCarthy was not a part of HUAC, because he was in the Senate, this was the House committee, but HUAC was absolutely spurred on by McCarthyism's efforts. What had happened just before 1947? What ended in 1945?
World War II.
World War II. What was our relationship with the Russians during World War II?
We were allies, but
We were fucking allies! Not friends.
yeah.
But we were on the same side. And now 2 years later, we're hunting down everyone who's ever talked to a Russian. What the fuck? The Hollywood 10 were 10 of the biggest executives in the film industry at the time. So in 1947, 10 of the biggest names in the film industry, the biggest names in the executive side, right? Not stars, but executives, are called to the House and are asked to testify about anyone they know with a connection or relationship to the Communist Party. Here's how this works. All right, here's how this goes. Trent, you're on trial. You're being called to testify. I'm a congressman. Number one, my office, since I'm the chair of HUAC, my office informs Trent, you are being asked to testify before the House Un-American Affairs Committee. We are expecting you to speak on this date at this time. Be here, right? Choice number one is for Trent to say, no, I do not wish to testify. At which point my committee says, oh, okay, then we're going to arrest you. We're just going to go ahead and arrest you then because you're defying a subpoena from the United States Congress. So Trent, at that threat box, goes, okay, fine, I'll come talk to you. And so Trent reluctantly sits before my committee, but he won't answer any of my questions. I ask Trent questions and he's ducking it. He's either taking the fifth or he's just evading answers, right? So I start wondering if maybe Trent's a communist. Because he's not giving up anybody, so maybe Trent's a communist. So now my questions are all about casting aspersions and doubt on Trent's loyalties to the United States of America. Maybe Trent isn't a patriot after all. Why the fuck would the film industry want to support and pay a man who doesn't even love his own country? Through entirely insinuation, with zero evidence, but just through insinuation, I've now ruined his career. Trent knows this, right? He knows this. He's seen this on TV. He knows what's going on. So Trent decides he's going to play ball. The problem is, Trent doesn't actually know any communists. But I don't believe that Trent doesn't know any communists, because if Trent is telling me, I don't know anybody. Well, okay, well then you're a communist, obviously, because you're hiding this. There's no way you don't know a communist. You're hiding this. So now I've ruined Trent's reputation again. So Trent knows if he's going to come before HUAC and testify, he's either A, going to ruin his own career, or B, he's going to give me names. He is going to give me the names of people who may or may not be communists. Even if Trent has zero reason to believe they're a communist, Trent's going to give me their name to show that he's working in good faith. So Trent gets off, but now 7, 8, 20 other people are going to go through the exact same thing Trent went through. This is the danger of Hugh Jackman and Hollywood 10. Right? For the record, does anybody know what crime is actually being committed by joining the Communist Party? Do you know specifically what that crime is called? Because it's not. It's not a fucking crime. It is not illegal to be a communist. It never has been illegal to be a communist. You are allowed to be a communist. We're ruining people's lives based on not a crime. They're literally, in the eyes of the law, there is no difference between being a communist and being a White Sox fan. Imagine the Red Scare, but instead of hunting down commies, we're hunting down White Sox fans. Who the fuck gets on board with that crusade? It's insane that our country went through this. It's even more insane that we ruined people's lives over it. Ruined people never worked again. Many people committed suicide once their names were mentioned in front of the committee. Ruined people's lives, ruined their livelihoods, because we were afraid they might be talking to some people who speak Russian. This was especially egregious in the film industry, right? The Red Scare was fucked up across the board, but it was especially disgusting in the film industry because during World War II, our government encouraged the film industry to work with the Russians. Encouraged. 2 years before this, the same people who are ruining your fucking life were asking you to go work with your counterpart over here to learn from them. And they could learn from you. Can you imagine you go to work and your boss says to you, hey, I want you to train the new kid. Okay? He's got a lot of good ideas, he's got a lot of good things, but he needs to learn the ropes. So I want you to train him. You learn from him, he learns from you. Everything's great. And you do that. You do what your boss asks you to, and you do it well. You train the new kid teaches you a few tricks. Symbiotic relationship works wonderfully. The kid gets fired, right? The new kid later on, like 6 months, 7 months, gets fired. And your boss now hates that guy. Your boss then turns to you and says, hey, wait a minute. Did you ever work with that kid? He said, well, fucking course I worked with him. You told me to work with him. You partnered me with him. Of course I worked with him. Oh, well, then you're fired too. Because you're tainted. I can't have you interacting with that piece of shit. That's what we did to these people. That's what we did to people who worked in the film industry. It was so insane on so many levels. And we were happy to do it. The country supported it. It was popular. It was encouraged. Because we do some amazing fucking things, and we also do some absolutely shit insane things. We lose our collective fucking minds. Right? Like banning TikTok. Like what? The things that this country is capable of, the things that our people are capable of, but at the same time we're like, you know what? I don't really like who you talk to, so you aren't allowed to work anymore. And it's called blacklisting. These people's names, through insinuation alone, were blacklisted. They were not allowed to work. No one would hire them because they may or may not know somebody who once went to a communist meeting. Sorry to brainwash you guys with all my indoctrination. Come on, click. There we go. Double click me. All right, so two more. In 1947, NBC and CBS began broadcasting news on television. So in 1947, both NBC, the National Broadcasting Corporation, and CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System, start broadcasting news. Again, television premiered in 1939, but it's not until 1947 that two of the three networks decide, you know what, maybe people want to know what's going on. So how did people get the news before 1947? Newspapers? Radio? Film reels? When you would go to the movies, before the movies started, there would be animation, there would be short films, and there would be newsreels. Right? Oh, shit. Now, you don't need to leave your house to see the pictures of what's happening, because it's different. It's different hearing about it than seeing it. So we get national news, national broadcast news in 1947. In 1948, the Supreme Court attempts to hear the case of U.S. versus Paramount et al. You guys know what et al. Means? You hear that? It means and a bunch of other people. Right? Et al. Just means like, oh, and also a bunch of other people we're not going to take the time to name. So like you'll see that like on when somebody cites a journal in a paper, it'll be like one name et al. Because there's like 20 authors. You don't want to write down all 20 authors. So U.S. versus Paramount et al. Was the United States versus Paramount, Universal, 20th Century Fox, MGM, and RKO, known as the Big Five. These were the 5 gigantic film studios in the United States. And in 1948, the Attorney General of the United States, the Justice Department, brought suit against all 5 of these companies, claiming that they were engaging in illegal monopolistic behavior, specifically as it relates to a practice known as vertical integration. Vertical integration is where a single entity owns everything about the product from conceptualization through sales. Okay? For example, if I wanted to start Jaeger Media, right? I want to start my own movie company. To be vertically integrated, I would need to, number one, have contracted writers. So the story, nobody else can buy the story. The story is exclusive to my company. Contracted producers, directors, actors. They can't work for anybody else but me, right? I would have to own my own film processing lab, right? To be able to create the film into a product that's actually viewable by the public. My own duplication house that duplicates the reels of film that go out all over the country. I would need to own my own distributor who makes sure these get everywhere and ships them. I would need to own the theaters so that the only way you're going to see my movie is if you go to a Jaeger theater. That's vertical integration. No one has any opportunity to make money off of this product but me. My company is the only one who has any option of profit off of the product. The United States government accused the Big Five of engaging in exactly that, which they were. That's the way the studio system was built, is if you were a Paramount star, you worked for Paramount. Right? If you're an actor, you sign a 5-picture deal for Paramount. That means that the studio executives at Paramount tell you which 5 movies you're going to be in. And that's what you have to do. And you're not allowed to work for anybody else. You're not allowed to do anything else. You're not an artist. You're an actor. Same if you're a director, cinematographer, editor, writer, producer. Right? You were stable. You worked for this one company with your product. They also had their own theaters. In Rockford, right? I realize most people think Rockford's a shithole, but at one time, Rockford was a big deal. Rockford was a moving and a shaking city, right? Rockford had 4 movie theaters at one time. Not because their population demanded it, right? Not because like, oh wow, we just have so many people, but because the movie theaters were branded by studios. You had an RKO theater, you had a Paramount theater, you had an MGM theater. If you wanted to see King Kong, you could only go to the RKO theater. It was only shown at the RKO theaters in the country. Up in Madison is a great example of this. There's 2 old movie theaters. They were called movie palaces, built literally right across the street from each other, that are still there. The Orpheum and the Palace, right across the street from each other in Madison. And you go there, you'd be walking. I mean, now they're like dilapidated, and they're not nearly the shape they used to be. But you can still walk down the street and go, why the fuck would you have movie theaters across the street from each other? Well, it's because one was only showing Paramount films, and the other was only showing Universal. Right? So in 1948, yeah, the film companies were a monopoly. They were vertically integrated. There was no way to get into the system. Well, the government sues and says, all right, you can't do that anymore. That's unfair business practices. Stop it. Before the Supreme Court can hear the case, the film companies reach an agreement with the Attorney General. They go, fine, we'll stop. And as a result, they stop. But only by selling off their theater rights. That's it. That's how they break vertical integration, is they just stop only distributing to their own theaters. Right? Because it didn't go before the Supreme Court, because it wasn't actually heard by the Supreme Court, the ruling in that case is not law, because there was no ruling. Right? If it doesn't, the Supreme Court doesn't adjudicate it, it's not law. And the legislation certainly hasn't happened, right? The Congress hasn't written a law about it. So, they're allowed to do it again. And they fucking are. The reason you hate Comcast is because of vertical integration. Comcast doesn't have to worry about making you happy. They can give a shit if you're happy. You don't have a choice. You want to see my movie? Well, then you have to go through my company. And you're only going to see it on my network. And you're only going to see my network if you have my internet service. It's vertical integration 2.0. Which again, until the government says no and sues them, there's nothing to stop them from doing it. Right? There's nothing to stop them from doing it. More on that to come, let me tell you what. In 1962, we get the first transatlantic satellite broadcast. For the first time, we broadcast from one side of the Atlantic Ocean to the other. And we do that because of satellites. Yay, satellites. So I'm going to do an incredibly crude drawing, because it is literally the only drawing I know how to do. Let's say that we've got the United States over here, right? There's Florida and Maine and all that. Right? And don't. And then over here we have England, and there's Ireland.
This isn't to scale.
It is. It is exactly the scale. That is the size. Okay. I'm an art major. Bob Apple wanted to walk in right now and just pass out. He's like, what the fuck? Okay. So, does anybody know how far it is from the United States to England? It's a lot.
Yeah.
We can agree it's a lot, right? I don't know the exact nautical mileage, but it's a lot. Let's say it's 10,000 miles, okay? And again, I don't know if that's even remotely fucking true. I just want to impress upon you that it's a lot, right? It's hard for a signal to travel 10,000 miles, right? That's a long fucking distance for a signal to travel. That requires a significant amount of strength. Think about your car radio, right? If you're tuned into a Rockford radio station and you drive west, you're not going to get to Galena with the same radio station on. And that's sure as shit not 10,000 miles away. So how do we get a signal from here to here over so great of a distance?
Two cans of really long straight.
An incredibly long, really big cable at the bottom of the ocean. While it's 10,000 miles from here to here, if you think in 3D, if you think on a third dimension, it's significantly less mileage to space. So if I can get my signal, now I don't need it to be strong enough to travel 10,000 miles, I need it to be strong enough to travel 200 miles to the satellite orbiting above us. So again, three-dimensional plane, let's imagine this is up in space. 200 miles. And then it's another 200 miles this way. So now, because of satellites, I can beam my signal up, use the satellite as basically an intensifying mirror, where it receives the signal, repowers it, and sends it back the other 200 miles. Now my signal doesn't need to travel 10,000 miles, it only needs to travel 200. And then the satellite will bounce it the other 200 back. In 1962, we figure out how to do this. Well, we figured it out beforehand. Right, but in 1962, we do it. We actually achieve the ability to send a signal immediately from one side of the Atlantic Ocean to the other. Not only is this just fucking cool, this revolutionizes the way we're able to communicate. We start broadcasting news in 1947. But that news can't get to the other side of the ocean right away. News travels but it can only travel by very limited means, right? Without transatlantic broadcasting, without satellite communication, there's a significant delay between something happening in Europe and us knowing about it in the US, and vice versa. Now, immediate. Now, John F. Kennedy in 1962 can give an address in Washington, D.C., and people in London can watch it live. Kind of important in 1962. Kind of important given the state of the world at that point. The height of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, all of these incredibly important, significant, large national, international events occurring. Good timing that we have the ability to get that visual representation immediately, regardless of the distance. Right? The first transatlantic broadcast is significant, but it's not like, okay, we only need that news to get over to Europe. It also means it goes in all directions. Now we can go to Asia, we can go to South America, right? Those signals can go anywhere because we're going up, which is a much shorter distance than going across. Okay? Now, that transatlantic broadcast opens up the door to global communication, global broadcasting. Once we have that successful use of transatlantic satellite, we say, okay, satellites work. We can use it all over the globe. And we very, very quickly do. A phrase I've used here before that I will use many more times because it's a very popular expression in mass communication and media studies is that the world is shrinking. Right? Not literally, the world isn't actually getting smaller, but because of media communication technologies, I can be anywhere in the world at the moment. Right? I know what's going on everywhere else in the world at any given time. And that only becomes possible because of this first step in 1962. Right? That's what really opened up that door to global communication. Okay. Before we go to the next page, we'll stop there. Since there's only 4 of you, I don't see the point in dragging this out. Obviously nobody wants to be here. It's okay. It's okay. I can see it through your mask. I can tell. Trent's been looking really pissed off the whole time. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but go watch it. Go watch the video later. Like, don't watch me on the video. Just watch Trent. And the whole time Trent's just going. You can see him mumbling under his mask. He's just mad because he didn't bring me any coffee. All right. Still no coffee, Trent. Still think I'm joking? What's my order, Trent?
The grande mocha, know it.
Venti
mocha.
I want the full fucking 20, buddy. Don't you shortchange me with that medium shit. No. Venti, 20. I need all the fucking mocha I can get. Look at this. There's a lot of fuel to run this train. Okay?